Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. This is the gallery opening for the second and third quarter gallery at the Rainier Club. We're going to start the evening with a blessing from Ken Workman. He's the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle, the man after which the city is named. Learning about his past inspired Ken to dive into the Duwamish heritage and to master the Lushootseed language. Ken is a Duwamish Tribal Council member, and he will join us in September for a Public and Global Affairs luncheon where you can learn more about him and the Duwamish fight for federal recognition as a tribe. With that, I give you Ken Workman. Thank you, Ken.
Wow, that sounds pretty impressive. So in my own language, my name would be Yayu Stobes. So Yayus is work and Stobes is man. So this is the only name that I have. It's the one I was born with. It just so happens that Workman translates perfectly into our own native language, the Lushootseed. I'm retired now. Retired flight operations engineering down there, the street over here at Boeing. Retired tool engineering, retired, that's over at Boeing. Retired council, so I'm no longer on Duwamish Tribal Council. And retired president of our nonprofit arm. But I'm happy to come here and speak and say a few words. And so just like my grandfather who stood on the shore, just across the bay, right over there, just about where Salties is. He stood there and he says, Slalil disiyaya adisha ogoda, which simply means, Slalil, come ashore. Disiyaya, my friend, adisha ogoda, on this land, to this land of the Duwamish. So in 1851, this is how we welcomed the Denny family. So my grandfather said that 170 years ago, and we continue to say that today. We recognize that the world has changed, and it's changed a lot. But when we sit inside of a building like this, an ancient building like this, that's built of the timbers that were growing here when there was nothing but creeks and trees and a handful of Duwamish people. Well, we might have around 6,000 or so. But we had lots of houses around Lake Washington and up the river. And so that's where we are. And we've been here for all of that time. And so we are still here today to say these humble words. Thank you for coming here today. Thank you for being on this land of the Duwamish. It's an honor to be here amongst you. This simply means my name is Workman and I'm leaving.
Thank you, Ken. At this point, we're going to invite, first introduce Dr. Robert Winquist and Judith Winquist, who have collected these wonderful images and these wonderful slides, and thank them for sharing them with us both tonight and for the next 6 months.
Yes.
Bob will come up, and he doesn't need any introduction for those of us who are members, so I will just say, welcome.
Thank you. I don't need that. Thanks.
You're already wired.
I'm wired. I'm Bob. Welcome, everyone. And this has been 2 years coming to do all the events that are going to happen throughout the year. And particularly here at the club, we're calling it Edward Curtis and Native Voices. So we're really happy to share these things with everyone. Lots of things happening, and please attend as many as possible. So tonight, just a little introduction. Edward S. Curtis. I think some important things about him is that life wasn't easy growing up, and his father was a Civil War veteran who came out of the war troubled, like a lot of people are. He was an itinerant preacher. And because of that, he took Edward at a young age with him out to preach, and he learned to live on the land. So he learned to catch a muskrat for dinner, learned to camp, learned a whole bunch of skills which were critical and the only reason this project could go forward. His father also found a lens in the Civil War, just a camera lens, not a camera. And somehow or other, as a 12-year-old boy, he figured out how to make a little camera box and thought that would be a pretty good idea. They moved here from Minnesota at the time to over by Port Orchard, originally thought to be Sydney. Now I just learned it's Gorst, which if any of you go that direction, but right over by Port Orchard. He came with his father. They built a log cabin, then invited the rest of the family out, and 3 days later the father dies, and at age 19 he has to run the family. He has to support them, he has to grow the food, he has to fish, dig clams, do all of those things. So once again, he has learned to live off the land and live very simply. He injured himself and working 3 jobs and injured himself in a lumber accident, broke his back, and was in bed for almost a year. And it was another really important thing. So while in bed, he lay there and he watched the sun come through the windows each day. And he learned light. And light became absolutely critical for him. And when we go see some images and see them, how they're shining down on people, and many images, instead of the face-on, flat, bright light image, many of these play on light, and you'll see shadows and reflections and side views and things capturing all of that light that he learned by lying in bed. The next thing that the outdoor trained him is how to be outdoors. And so Mount Rainier became very important to him. He looked at it and thought, I'd like to be there. So he did a lot of climbing on Rainier. And one day he rescued some very important people. So they were trying to decide if Mount Rainier should become a national park. And the head of the Audubon Society, Bird Grinnell, was there. Head of National Geographic, Kent Merriam, was there. He rescued them because on Mount Rainier, if you've been there very much, there's a cloud cover that can move in kind of in the middle unexpectedly. And as you go up to Camp Muir, the slope, if you go the wrong way, it takes you down into the glacier. And so he rescued them, took him up to his camp at Camp Muir, started a fire, had the wood, gave him some food. He had a lot of charm, so he brings him back to Seattle, takes him to the studio, and by the time he's finished getting to know these people, they invite him then to go on the Harriman expedition up north in 1899. He's the photographer for the expedition, and he then gets to know more people. John Muir is on that, John Burroughs. They then introduce him to Teddy Roosevelt, and it goes on and on and on and on. So the Rainier Club, I like to think he was standing right here, given a lecture. So he became an all-star photographer in Seattle. After breaking his back, he said, I can't do that anymore. I'm going to go get a studio. I'm going to become a photographer. And he became a photographer and very rapidly became the premier photographer for the city of Seattle, making photographs of all the famous people. And if any of you have been to the Arctic Club, which is a block away, which is now a Hilton Hotel, it has pictures of all the members with Curtis's signature. The Sunset Club, I think, has a bunch of those as well. So he was Seattle's premier photographer, became a member of this club in 1903, and spent quite a bit of time here initially. Burke's pictures upstairs on the 4th floor, who was president here. Curtis took that picture. There's a mug book here. Curtis took those photos. So he spent a lot of time here initially until he was off and gone. And while doing all these photographs, he noticed your aunt. Princess Angeline was, they basically told all the natives, they did so many horrible things to the natives, but they told her she had to leave Seattle with everybody else. She said, do you know my name? I'm not leaving. So she stayed, and he was thrilled. And he got her to agree that he could take her picture. And then went on to take pictures of several natives around, and actually won a national contest with Homeward, which is a group of local natives up by Tulalip. And then also won a national photographic contest for a most beautiful child, and Teddy eventually asked him to be the only photographer for Teddy Roosevelt for his inauguration and his daughter's wedding. So Curtis used to wander around this place, and when things went bad later and he got divorced and the wife threw him out for good reason, he lived here, and he was broke all the time, and many of the images you see coming up the stairs and in the hallways are his way of paying rent. So that was the best rent this institution ever received. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology of the day. And that's the main purpose tonight. And we're going to go back 100 years, 100 plus years. So we don't get to pull out our phones and shoot pictures back then. It was a lot tougher than that. And he had all this gear that he had to haul around. And so we were fortunate enough to acquire his camera. And this is the letter of authenticity from his son-in-law, who then ran the studio with him when he moved down to Los Angeles. And this is the camera that Curtis used most frequently. And he had early on some larger ones that were even tougher to use. But this was his workhorse. And even when newer things came along, he went back to this because this is what he liked the best. And so this has probably been down in the desert and up the mountains and up in Alaska and every place you can imagine. And he tells one great story of going up on Mount Rainier to take pictures, and he had all his gear with him, which was, and even a bigger camera than this at the time. And he gets a local farmer to help him with a horse, old swayback horse, and he packs all the gear, and this horse goes up Mount Rainier with him, up to, he says, 12,000 feet. I'm guessing it was up by Camp Muir. And they take all the gear up, and he's taking pictures, and then it's time to come down, and he puts all the gear back on the horse, and he says, let's go get some oats. At which point, the horse sits down on its bottom, puts all four legs straight out, and just heads down the mountain. And Curtis thinks everything's going to just be crashed to bits. But this horse, if you've been up by Camp Muir up on Rainier, there's all kinds of rocks sticking up and everything. And this horse was doing this around the rocks and finally is completely out of sight. Well, he goes down looking for the horse and finally finds it down there, happy as can be. And he gets back and he tells the farmer this story. He can't believe the story anyway. He tells the farmer this story and he says, oh, I've been training him quite a while to do that. So this camera has been a lot of places, and I'll see if I can get it up on a stage here. So we acquired this in an auction, and it's been in a box, and I've been frightened to even open the box. But an expert. Pardon? Yes?
Then you should introduce them.
Okay, in a moment I will. This is my wife, Judith. She helps me frequently, and I was just thinking I should introduce the Flurries, who I was going to introduce later, but I'll introduce them right now. So the Flurries have had a Shop with Curtis things down here in Pioneer Square, and it's a museum in itself, and you should all go down there. We're lucky to have Melissa and Rob here tonight. They have some great things, and the later slides we ended up getting through them too, as well as some other things. So thank you for being here. But I'm searching for Todd. Where's Todd? Todd is right there. So being afraid to open this box, somehow or other, I fortunately discovered Todd Gangler, Art and Soul in Ballard, great place. And I had him open the box and put it together. And I have no knowledge, but the little bit I have, I owe all to him. So here's the camera. And it's on this tripod. And the tripod does wonderful things. So it will tilt. Yeah, could I use your phone? Yeah. Will you look it up on Google and see how to do this exactly? And it will rotate, and it goes up and down. And so he would set up his tripod and then do whatever it took to be able to take the picture that he wanted. And then the magic little button on top opens up the camera. A little lever brings it forward. There are little marks over here that tells him the distance, so he has a pretty good idea how far away things are. It has a shutter speed. It has the aperture that he can adjust. And then in addition, he can move it up and down, and he can move it back and forth. A little tight there. And because of this flexible bellows, it keeps everything square with the image. So he can just set up, and frequently, we talked about light, frequently he would be in a tent with whoever he's taking the picture of, and he would just open the flap of the tent to let the light in. And so he would be, and sometimes he'd wait 2 hours for the correct light. So light, as anyone in photography knows, is critical, but he could then set up the tripod and adjust the camera so he wasn't fiddling around too much and making everybody, run around or anything. And then, back here is where the film loads. So this comes out. I'm not going to take it all the way out. And the glass plate is loaded here and then feeds back in. And this whole unit comes out, and when he exposes it, he flips this around so he knows it's exposed, and then he's all set to go. And then he goes click, just like that. So this was his prize, and this is what he really did most of his imaging with. It's a Century camera. It's 1902, but it's what he used. And I will get to that, but I wasn't going to, it's kind of messy here. So here's a temporary viewfinder in front. So here's a little viewfinder, and you need a hood to look through it. So it's in back so people can't see it. This whole back flaps down, and you could look right through here is where it is, and then he would put a black drape over his head so he could see through the back here. So I'm going to slide this back to protect it. Todd was kind enough to show me to be careful about the gap. Find the gap. I didn't even know how to close this, but he showed me how to close it. Just like that. There it goes. Yeah, force it. And there we go.
What film did he use?
Glass. So he had glass with an emulsion, and
He coated it himself?
do you know if he coated it himself?
No, he would buy them.
He would buy them coated. The AV expert here, Ed Sheets. We want to thank Ed Sheets. That's just a picture of all the parts. So, this is what we couldn't see because it's on the back side. This is what I flapped open at the end that you couldn't see, that this is where he's looking through with a hood over him so he can see what he's doing. Next. So, people have seen a lot of his images, sepia tone. He worked a lot, really hard in photography. He did cyanotypes, silver prints, platinum prints, gold prints, all kinds of images, but is best known for his volumes and his portfolios. Many of them are here. with the sepia tones, and this is Homeward, which is where he won his first national prize. So I just wanted to show a couple of those in the next one. Chief Joseph. Chief Joseph was always trying to get home. He was Nez Perce. They chased him 1,700 miles. He took everyone with him. He took the whole family, the whole tribe. And they were, I think, 40 miles from the Canadian border when they finally were caught. And he then ended up being placed on a Colville reservation and always wanted to get back to the Wallowas, which is kind of in Oregon near La Grande, if any of you have been down, or the Blue Mountains, down in that area. And he was here to give a speech to try to get back, is how his picture happened to be taken. Meany of Edmund Meany Hall of University of Washington, he was a big supporter of Curtis, and he was the one who invited Chief Joseph, and Chief Joseph was taken to a University of Washington football game of all things. And they were called the Sun Dodgers at that time, they were not yet the Huskies, but Chief Joseph was here for that event, as well as his nephew Red Thunder. And there are two images of him, this one and one with a headdress, and it's just remarkable. Again, if you look at the lighting on that, this isn't just the usual plaster picture. And he lived a lot with the various tribes, so because of his kind of his demeanor and his ability to live outdoors, he lived with the tribe, spent a lot of time with them, and you'll see the images that we see later. They obviously, worked with him. He wasn't just sneaking around trying to shoot some pictures and stuff. There was a lot of collaboration with them. Next. So nobody hears about the sounds much, and I'm going to do just a little bit about the sounds because they're an important part of his work, and they really don't get talked about very much. So I thought I'd just touch on it. And next. He did these wax cylinders, so he did recordings. It said he's done 10,000 recordings. I don't know how many, but the only ones I know of are back at Indiana University at the Archives of Traditional Music. And next. And so he recorded on an Edison recorder. Next. The cylinder sits on here, and this is where the speaker sits, where you would either record or listen back. So next picture. It shows it with the speaker. And so the next picture shows one of his original cases that his wax cylinder sits in. And the next is one of his original wax cylinders. Next. Oh, I forgot to bring a book. I was going to bring a book. The volumes that people know about his portfolios because they're all the images and they're just great to look at. But the volumes of his books are what are really incredible. He initially, as you know, started as a photographer, but he then went on to do the largest anthropologic work ever in the country. He did ethnology and religion and ceremonies and dress and everything about them, and what's written in the volumes is pretty remarkable. In addition to all these song sheets. So there are all these song sheets, and they not only tell you the name of the song, they tell it to you in native language and English and the whole thing. And so they started in volume 3, went through after that, and many of the recordings actually show up in the volume. So let's play this one. You can follow the words. You don't have to sing along.
Where's the bouncing?
Next. This is Motana, so this is Kwakiutl, Kwakwaka'wakw, north end of Vancouver Island. And it's pretty clear recording, and he recorded all kinds of these. So there's a whole, if anybody wants more, Sam, Seattle Art Museum, we're going to do 32 different recordings there. So at Seattle Art Museum, I think it's 32, we decided there'll be a listening station at Seattle Art Museum where you'll be able to hear all of these different recordings. So there's a whole bunch of them. And then I want to spend a little sound time with you here, not very much, because the recordings were then taken, and a composer from Yale took the recordings and made orchestra music to go with his presentations. So the gallery is all about a slideshow, initially talks, and later he gave the picture musicale, which those most of the images are from. And with that, he had an orchestra recording in the background. And so I'm going to show you the same image first with native. Go ahead and play this one. And you decide which you think goes best. So native voices. Next. The orchestra. "22-piece orchestra." And the orchestra director had to direct the orchestra with one hand and the projectionist with another. So this was going like this, and we had the 22-piece orchestra. This was played at reciprocal clubs of the Rainier Club. So the Cosmos Club, the what's the New York Century Club. He played a packed house in Carnegie Hall, standing ovations. Those were with orchestras, but with the nice slides. So I'll do one more of those next. So this is actually from the movie part, so the Kwakiutl movie that, again, we'll hear all about in October, starting with the native. First Nations. In Canada, they're referred to as First Nation. Next. Oh. That's enough. Next. Magic lantern slides. Again, my complete lack of knowledge, but we were collecting Curtis things, mostly gold tones or oratones, and Edward Curtis's lantern slides came through Fleury & Company, and we said, of course, not knowing anything about them. So they've been sitting upstairs for many years, and once in a while I'd take one out and hold it up to the sunlight and go, wow. And then I put it back away, and then later I pick another one up. And so we saw this as an opportunity that we could share them with other people. And I didn't know about this, but lantern slides started in 1650, the year 1650, and went for 200 years, 1850. And these were painted on glass. So these were people painting on glass and then showing them with magic projectors. We have one here. We'll look at some slides in a few minutes. And that was a huge part of entertainment that became more and more and more sophisticated. And then in 1850, about, just a little before that, which I've been educated on, thank you, Todd, but think of photography starting in 1850. And at that point, they were able to then print a photograph on a glass slide and hand color it. And that's what we're going to spend most of our time looking at. And I still can't imagine how they did that. These slides are this big, and they hand colored them. And then you'll see them blown up in there to a large size, still extremely clear. So they're pretty remarkable. And that's what we're going to see. So we're going to see photographs on glass that were subsequently hand colored. And just like the camera that I knew nothing about hand-colored slides or anything else. And so I go online and I find this outfit called the Magic Lantern Society. And I type in, "Help!" And like magic, Larry Cedarblum appears from Tacoma. And I had already purchased a magic lantern projector, which didn't really work, and if it did, I wouldn't have known how to work it. And met with Larry, and he helped me, and we got this all rigged up. And so next. And so I went back to the Morgan Library, J.P. Morgan, where Curtis had to turn a lot of things over because they were the only other people that I knew that had a bunch of lantern slides. We were the only ones. So I was excited to go back and see theirs. And when I got there, theirs were almost all sepia tone, and only 3 had color to them at all. And I realized that Curtis was holding out on J.P. Morgan. And so the lantern slides stayed in the family and eventually were able to come around. So the Morgan Library has a great collection of Curtis lantern slides, but they are almost all sepia tone. Next. This is just one of his containers. So lantern slides, Edward S. Curtis. So this is one of the boxes they have that store their lantern slides, and it's still encourage you to look at them, but they're not as good as what we are fortunate to have here in Seattle. Next. So this is one of them from the Morgan Library. This is actually the only color one I had reproduced from back there. And when we see the images in the other room, I've cut off all this material just back here so it really focuses on the image. But I wanted to show this one with the entire slide, because you'll see up on the right, if any of you have sorted slides to give a talk, you put a little number on them, and the next talk you sort them again and you put a different number on them. Well, here they are with that number up there and this number down there, and I don't know what talk it might have been, but that's how he sorted his slides, like a lot of other people have done. So I put the whole slide in just so you can see that. This is on the Spokane River, so this is our friends just over the mountain, so pretty close by. Next. But this is one of the Seattle lantern slides. And this is Nampeo, and she's an extremely famous artist. She's been known for a long time and was well known during her life, and people would go in and she would let anybody come in and she'd just smile and she'd just keep working. So she just did a lot of work. And this is Curtis at his best. So what do we have? We have, and you'll see it in there closer, the pots are in focus. Her palette colors are in focus. And she's sort of mystical back there, but the light's streaming in on her. And this is the kind of photographer, he worked really hard at his trade. So worked really hard, and she's spectacular. You'll see her in the next room. Next. Just another image. Kwakiutl, again, north end of Vancouver Island. Pensive look, the light coming in on him, a 3/4 look, not those plastic face-on looks that you saw so many people taking, but you can just feel the emotion in this fellow. And he has the classic neck ring on of a chief from up there, but this is just a look at the lantern slide. So next, I think that, that's my lantern slide projector. It's a little tiny one, but it has some nice brass on it. But we were just in Victoria this last weekend at the Magic Lantern Slide Society, and this is what they use to show lantern slides. So this is a triple-decker beauty, and it was the whole show back then. There wasn't anything else, so it was the whole show. So they're feeding them in from one side and another camera, and it makes it look really almost like motion pictures. And then these little converters, they have these wonderful slip slide, like somebody's head's getting cut off, and a rotating one where a kaleidoscope is going. But this is the type that would have been used at Carnegie Hall when he did his big presentations. I think that's the last one there. So we're now going to go to the real lantern slide projector, and Larry, yeah, you can close that. Thanks. Larry has agreed to show us some of the real slides. I'm just going to show you a few of these. There are some that aren't in the other room, so I just thought I'd show them for a moment. And this is at the Canyon de Chelly. This isn't the classic Canyon de Chelly picture, but he took a lot of them. This is an unpublished image, and I just show it for landscape. So he did some magnificent landscape pictures. And if you ever get a chance to go to Canyon de Chelly, it's on the kind of the border of Arizona and New Mexico. It's just a wonderful place. So next. This is watching the dancers. In the other room, it's a different image of this, but this is a similar image. And these are the Hopi women that are looking down on the snake dance. And they have these hairdos that mean they're unwed maidens, and these are called squash blossom hairdos. And it's what I always say, I think Princess Leia from Star Wars got her idea. I think she saw this picture. I'm pretty sure of it. So. Next one, please. This, again, is the Hopi snake dance, and after many, many visits, Curtis got them to agree to allow him to be part of the snake dance. And they, a lot of the tribes took Curtis into sweat lodges, figuring he'd pass out. They wouldn't have to talk to him anymore. They'd just pass out. But he was pretty good at sweat lodges, so he could do the sweat lodge. And to be part of this, he had to go out and gather the snakes. So they found a particularly big one and wrapped it around his neck to see if he was really up to the job. And he passed that. And then, just before he was going to participate in the dance, he got smart and said, I better not do that, because he was afraid that the Indian agents and the government and all those horrible people then would shut down the whole ceremony because he was in it and he wanted to protect them. So at the last minute he didn't participate, but he went through the initiation. Next. In the Badlands, South Dakota. So these are Sioux Warriors. And again, the colors, I have no idea who or how the colors were picked. Actually, Aishel Curtis, on the 4th floor, there are Aishel Curtis's pictures of Mount Rainier. And Aishel Curtis has quite a few lantern slides. Larry has some nice ones. And his sister, Ava, colored those for Aishel, but we're not sure who colored them for Edward Curtis. Ella McBride, I forgot to mention her earlier. Ella McBride, they met on Mount Rainier, and Ella came and worked in his studio in Seattle for many years. When the divorce came, she tried to buy the studio. It didn't happen. Ella opened her own studio. So she was an important part of the whole thing, and she may have been the hand colorist. Adolph Muir was the other one working there at that time. Next. So, prior to the Great Mystery, and this is Slow Bull, and he became a warrior with Red Cloud. We'll meet Red Cloud next door, and they have a purse, and on the purse, if you capture a horse, you get to put a horseshoe on your purse. And at age 14, he became a warrior. At age 17, he went out and captured 175 horses. So they didn't have room on his purse for all the horses he caught. And so he was a warrior with Red Cloud, and later on, Red Cloud isn't as well known he should be, so he defeated the United States Army. And 10 years later, the younger ones, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, went on to defeat Custer. So Red Cloud, that we'll see next door, he brought together the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho. The tribes didn't all get along all that well, and he managed to bring them all together and won some major feats, and Slow Bull was one of his warriors. Here is another terrible thing that happened to the natives. So this is the buffalo. The buffalo was critical. The buffalo was food. The buffalo was clothing. The buffalo meant everything to them, and the Europeans came in with the railroads and basically wiped out the buffalo, which then, if your food supply was taken away, like we're seeing here with the salmon, it's just a terrible thing. So next. So this is Flathead Camp on the Jaakko River. There's another one in there with blue skies, but it didn't have the natives in it. So next. Is there one more? on the kootenai. So this is a kootenai, a young maiden. This is made from flexible boughs and covered with elk skin, later covered with a type of a fabric, but covered with elk skin, and this is the kootenai. Is that the last one? No. Yeah, one more? Okay. Who's next? We're some fishermen. We go down to the Columbia River, and here's before the dams, exactly. And here we are with the pools, dipping down, catching the salmon. And I'm thinking he must be really strong because I look at the size of that net and how big the fish were back then. And I don't know how he'd managed to haul all those up, but there he is. And there are lots of slides on the fishing, which again is a critical food source. And not as much salmon in the Columbia anymore, but hopefully they'll come back. Next. So that's the one we saw earlier. And no, we're not going to focus here. We'll just turn it. We can just turn that off, and we can turn some lights back on. In the case out here are lantern slides, so you'll be able to see original lantern slides. And I want you to pause and marvel at those for a minute, because somehow or other on those little slides, they got hand painted, and they got blown up into big pictures and maintained their clarity beyond belief. And where is Abby? Abby, don't be shy. Here is Abby. Abby is also at Art and Soul over in Ballard. And somehow or other, I was lucky enough to meet these folks, and Abby has worked really hard blowing up these images. And I was advised to not clean the slides. So I checked all over the place. Everybody said, don't clean the slides. So pieces of dust and those little things she has meticulously removed, and those blown up images in there are her work, and they are fantastic. So
I still like to